Yeah, so Supreme Court stuff. I think we've got 8 cases left. So
Wow.
I think on Thursday we had 12 cases. We had 4 really big ones that were good, 3 really big ones. One was about Monsanto, but there was another day scheduled on Monday. So we'll have another day on Monday. I don't think we're going to get all 8 of them released. So we'll see if they also schedule something perhaps on Tuesday or maybe Thursday next week. So that might kick us into July. I don't have a calendar up, but we might get through them all next week. Like if we do another day of 4 and another 4, we might be done. And Birthright is in there. There's Birthright. There's another big one about the election deadlines that you were talking about.
Yeah.
Called Watson, which about, Alabama, I think it was, sent out. There's a rule in Alabama that they can collect ballots 5 days after the election. And I think that's going to go our way too. There was a lot of very interesting questions during those oral arguments from Amy Coney Barrett and Judge Alito. Alito was saying, if it's 5 days, why don't we just make it 5 weeks or 5 months? Why don't we just put it out whenever? And it's just done whenever you're satisfied or whatever. So I think there was a lot of skepticism about that, which means we might have a national federal election day that ends on a day. And you got to get your stuff in. And I hope that is the case because I think, like you mentioned, it opens the door for a lot of fraud.
And what about Birthright, Robert? What's your take on that? Are they waiting on that so they could stick us in the back or? Yeah, it's a great question. And I listened to those oral arguments and I was not too thrilled about some of the questions that were coming out of the judges' mouths. And it's, I think, a shared opinion that it might not go our way. I was also at another event where they had a woman, and I forget her name, but she was amazing. She, I think, had clerked for Judge Gorsuch and maybe had worked for Scalia. She was, like Supreme Court guru. And she gave us a brief on it, and she did not sound optimistic about it based on what she heard at the oral argument. And I hope I'm wrong. I think that there can be some things that they latch onto. Like there's, of course, in the 14th Amendment, the phrase that we pay a lot of attention to is the subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And if you are subject to the jurisdiction of a nation, from our reading of the prior cases and Wong Kim Ark and these other precedent that were from 1898 and much earlier, it's about allegiance. It's about the sovereign recognizing that you're in the nation and that you are subjecting yourself to the sovereign's law. You're basically making yourself allegiant to the rules versus just being inside the jurisdiction, right? Subject to the jurisdiction. Sure, if you're here illegally, then you're in the jurisdiction. If you commit a crime, you're subject to the criminal charges. The laws all apply to you, but you have not shown allegiance or subjugation to the sovereign. You're not actually somebody who subjected yourself and gotten permission of the sovereign to be domiciled here, meaning there's no allegiance. And so you should not be able to exploit and get a benefit of your violation of the sovereign rights. And so that's how we've interpreted it. There was a case called Wong Kim Ark where there were some non-citizens, Wong Kim Ark's parents, who were Chinese nationals. This was a case out in the West. And they were in the country, but they were here legally. They were lawful permanent residents when they had their child. And so from our interpretation of that precedent, right, that means that they had subjected themselves to the laws of the sovereign and were granted a right to be here. So they were more analogous to a green card holder. And their child, they found, had citizenship. That's a very different situation than somebody who breaks in illegally or birth tourism cases. Well, the Chinese, Peter Schweitzer's new book says there may be 10 to 15 million American citizens coming of voting age pretty soon who were Chinese, part of the Chinese birthing tourism.
It's crazy. There are literal clinics that are set up in Miami and other places around the country that market this.
Yeah,
literally market, come have your baby here.
Yeah, there's an entire apartment building in Irvine, in Orange County, Robert, that just has apartments with women coming in 8 months pregnant from China.
They don't even have to go there. There's islands that are much closer to China, which is more convenient for travel. I think I forgot the name of one of them, but Robert, maybe you could answer this. I'm curious. Isn't the whole problem because of the missing one word, stateless? And what I mean is the whole birthright citizenship problem occurred after slavery, from what I understand. You had all the people here, and suddenly, well, these were stateless people. They had no home. So to simplify, they're like, you know what? You're born here, boom, you're a citizen. But if they had said stateless, we wouldn't even have a problem now. Those people were stateless, so it made sense. And if that carried over to this time, then it would only be, I mean, a minuscule amount of people who could be considered stateless. Or am I completely off in my interpretation?
No, I think that's right. I don't know that phrase came up specifically in the debates or in the case law, but that was a major concern during this era. So right after the Civil War, obviously, we had the Reconstruction amendments, 13th, 14th, and 15th, eliminating slavery, 14th Amendment, which was also where the birthright citizenship clause is, that kind of rewrote the rules, a lot of it to recover from the Civil War. Now, there's been an interesting phenomenon when it comes to citizenship in kind of the new world versus the old world. So if you go back and look at Europe, they have citizenship that is connected to blood. So jus sanguinis is, I think, the Latin phrase for that, right? Jus sanguinis, which means connected to blood. And that means that if a parent is a citizen of the nation and you share the blood with that parent, then that is one of the criteria to become a citizen. Then we got to the New World and we had all this uncharted territory. We had all of this land, and many people did not have a state, as you mentioned. So it was a kind of a stateless environment. So they did not want people to be stateless. So if you were actually in the United States and you didn't have a state in one of these South American territories and you had a child, we don't want to create this entire group of people that have nowhere to go. So then we came up with jus soli, which is just basically a geographic region. And if you're born in the geography, that was good enough to be a member of the nation. And in early America, right, we had a lot of Native Americans, Indians that came up in this. Are they citizens? Are they not? There's a whole separate, analysis there on how that is all interpreted. And it kind of, in some ways, inched more towards jus soli, which was if you're just born geographically here, and you're here in America, you're a citizen, therefore you're not a stateless person. And we didn't want these, huge groups of people that were not stateless. But then I would say after the Civil War, this is in, the mid 1800s, the nation is developed. We've actually spread across the entire nation. So subject to the jurisdiction thereof was a modification of the original jus soli, which is place of birth, is all that governs, into more of an allegiance type of test. It matches all of the other modern day European countries. Like none of them do this. None of them have, the vast majority of them don't. I think there's maybe a handful of them that do. You just show up, plop a baby down, automatic citizen. You've got to have lineage. You got to have a parent that shares blood of citizenship in order for that to count. So I think that truthfully, it was a modification of that, but I'm not sure if the Supreme Court.
Are they going to split the baby on this thing somehow, Robert, to maybe end chain migration part of it? Like you get in, you can't bring every single person from Vietnam with you.
Yeah, and it's an interesting question. So I think there's also another, in the 14th Amendment, there's also at the very end of the birthright citizenship clause, it says, in which they reside. The word reside is right in there. So there's a way I think the Supreme Court could, for example, say that if you're an illegal alien, somebody undocumented who is residing here, you have birthright citizenship. But if you're a birth tourist who is not residing here, you're just in here temporarily, you don't count, right? So you could kind of hang your hat on that and split it.
Yeah.
Not sure if they'll do that or not, but I think that might be one way to do it.
Even if it doesn't,
it would take care of half the problem.
Yeah. Any
improvements. So somebody here more permanently, right, would have that right. Even if you are here illegally, then they would just hang it on that second half. But part of what we saw, I think, this week were some really good immigration cases, which makes me a little bit nervous. So it's like the Supreme Court gives you the tools, like we saw in a couple of the cases. One of them was about TPS, so temporary protected status. The Supreme Court now saying that the executive branch has essentially sole discretion on when to end or start it. Right. And this is all codified by Congress. Congress wrote in there in the law that allows this to be a thing that we have,
unfortunately, that the discretion lies with the Secretary of Homeland Security, ultimately with the president.
Wow.
So now the federal judges who are trying to block this can't do it. And they had done that. So, for example, with Haiti, what they said is that the how and the why of the decision by Kristi Noem to end TPS status for the Haitians, they could challenge that. There's this concept called judicial review. And the law that was passed for TPS said there is no judicial review of the determination of the secretary. So what the lower courts did is they got very sneaky about this. And they said, well, determination, we're just going to kind of bifurcate that out. And we're going to say that determination only means like the final decision, the yes or no, canceled or continued. So we can't override that. But in the process of determining, we can review that. That is now subject to our review. And we can find that your process of reaching the determination was invalid. And so there was a lower level judge who was Anna C. Reyes and others. And that's basically what they did with the Haitians. They said that Kristi Noem didn't do a thorough job of reaching the final answer. So the process of coming to the determination was invalid. She didn't consult with enough agencies. She didn't get, detailed reports from inside Haiti. How good is it? How bad is it? There were some, racist comments that were said by the president and other people, whatever, that were actually undermining the process. And so she issued basically a pause on the cancellation of the program. And the Supreme Court said that's not what the law says. The law said determination is both the final determination and the how you got to the determination and the why you got to the determination. And it encompasses that whole thing. So we've seen this pattern where federal judges just substitute their judgment in for the presidency, basically usurping the will of the people as activist, unaccountable judges.
Do we live in a critocracy, Robert? I'm just going to jump to the next level here, because at what point does their power wane? I mean, it only seems to be growing in that direction, Robert.
I know, man, you're preaching. I'm completely in agreement with you. I have been screaming about this forever.
Oh, so have I. I've been screaming about it too.
Yeah, what is it going to take? Congress won't even consider an impeachment proceeding against any of them or bad behavior, whether they're high crimes and misdemeanors is subject for debate, but they just know they're there permanently. They're not going to get removed. And the Supreme Court, which should be, kind of governing some of this and slapping them down harder, is refusing to do it. And so in many ways, we're kind of stuck with a lot of this, unfortunately. And it's a real problem because going back to the prior election order case that was just hacked to bits by another judge, we've got also these foreign-born judges. And I don't consider myself to be a xenophobic person.
No, I've been saying the same thing here on this channel.
What's their loyalty? That's the question. It's like, it's one thing to be foreign-born, but when you're always ruling against your adopted country, it's a problem. It really is.
Superman is literally a dual citizen with Trinidad and Tobago, a small island right in the Caribbean. Yeah. And so you ask, if she's a dual citizen, does she have allegiances to these other small countries that are all seeking to immigrate into the United States and get involved in the political process? Yeah. And then she issues rulings that are essentially preventing our society from validating whether people are voting or actual citizens. So it's, it's like a benefit.
There's a lot of them. And I noticed that Biden put them in at the end who are from the Bahamas, who are from Caicos and Trinidad and Tobago and areas that are not Ukraine. Let me put it that way.
Yep, there's a bunch of them. I think we counted 5 or 8, from other
out here.
locations.
Yeah, in LA, there's a bunch of them here too. I mean, it's every time I look one up, they're from the Caribbean.
I know.
It's really odd.
And then they come in and then they're here for like 5 years,
minutes.
And then they lecture us about our Constitution and about separation of powers and about what America is and what it means to be American. And we're thinking,
I think we need legislation to expand the presidential birth requirement to other
all federal.
Yeah. This is just out of control. I mean, we got a woman who may become the mayor of Los Angeles. We have a mayor in New York who was born in Uganda, who became a citizen in 2019. And now I have a Nithya Raman here who spent her entire life in India, and she's going to run Los Angeles. I mean, this is insane.